Hello, grade 12s. Welcome to today's lesson. Today we're doing economics with me, Spiwe. So today we're going to be focusing on the foreign exchange market and the balance of payments account. So these are two important concepts that we need to look at when we are looking at international trade. We know that countries are no longer self-sufficient, or they've moved away from a system where they were self-sufficient because of specialization. Other countries end up with a surplus, and then they decide to sell that to other countries in order to generate income. And also they might need resources that they don't have in their own country, and therefore they will have to rely on other countries in order to have access to those resources. So those are the two concepts that we'll be discussing in this lesson, and I trust that you're ready. You've got your exam pad with you, you've got your pen with you, and you'll be making notes as we go along or as we go through this lesson. So let's get started without wasting any time. So we're looking at the foreign exchange market. So that's our first concept that we're going to look at. So perhaps let's start by defining what the foreign exchange market is. So it is also known as the currency market. Remember, on our previous lesson, we looked at the whole issue of inflation and also countries trying to influence the value of their currency by buying currencies and selling them. And also we know that we have moved away from that system, and then we are using the free floating system, where we take the information from the forex markets based on supply and demand. So the foreign exchange market is also known as the currency market. So let's just define, or let's just go through the definition of what a foreign market is. So it is an exchange market, so we know that there's an exchange that happens here, which determines the relative values of different currencies and enables the conversion of currency to facilitate international trade. So this is quite interesting because, you know, we're from South Africa, and obviously our currency is the rand. And if we travel to other countries, they prefer that we use their own currency. So we know that the dollar is quite a common currency, and that is used in most countries. If you travel through Europe, you will find that the euro is used quite often in those areas. In Botswana, they use the pula, and so different countries have their own currencies. But then the value needs to be determined. We need to have an exchange rate to say that the dollar is worth so much as compared to the US dollar or to the British pound. So that happens in the foreign exchange market, where we're going to determine a relative value of different currencies so that we can enable the conversion of currency to facilitate international trade, because now you have different countries trading with one another. So this process is very important so that we know what the value of that country's currency is. So that is a definition of what a currency market is, or the foreign exchange market. So now let's have a look at the definition of what the balance of payments, also known as the BOP. So the balance of payments accounts record all financial transactions. So we're looking at the financial transactions between a country and the rest of the world over a period of a year. So this is also very important to note, that we are looking at the records, but only for a period of a year. They include export and import transactions, financial transfers, and also the financial capital transactions. So it is important that a country keeps record of all its transactions with other countries. It's good for them also, it's good for a country so that they can report back. And also when they are looking at economic growth, they can see how the international trade or how the international trade has contributed towards economic growth. So it's important that countries keep all record of transactions that they've made with other countries so that they can report back on the business activity or the economic activity that has taken place between them and other countries as well. So two important concepts to be aware of. So I'm just going to quickly recap, because as we go through this lesson, we will be coming across the concept of a foreign exchange market and that of a balance of payments accounts. Okay. So just to recap, the foreign exchange market it determines the relative values of different currencies and enables the conversion of currency to facilitate international trade, because countries have moved away from self-sufficiency and now they are trading with other countries, because specialization has brought about the surplus issue for many countries, and therefore if they've got more than enough for their citizens, they can actually sell the surplus into other countries and use that as a form of income. And then the balance of payments, which is the BOP account, keeps record of all financial transactions between a country and the rest of the world over a period of year. This information is important for planning in the public sector as well. When there's planning, if government is doing planning and is making economic goals, it can use this information from the balance of payments account in order to make strategic decisions. And they include export and import transactions, financial transfers, and the capital or the financial capital transactions as well. Okay, so now moving on, what are the reasons for international trade? Okay, is it a good idea just for us to be self-sufficient and not depend on other countries? So there are many reasons for international trade. Countries may have a surplus of some goods and a shortage of other goods, and they will trade in order to correct these imbalances. Okay, so some interesting terms. So I did chat about the surplus earlier on, that countries may end up with a surplus of some goods and also could have a shortage of other goods, and then therefore they will decide to trade in order to correct these imbalances that they may find. So it's important. So we can't say that we are self-sufficient as a country. We do rely on other countries for certain resources. For example, resources like gold are quite bulky in our country, and therefore in other countries there's a shortage for such resources. For example, we don't have oil in abundance, and therefore we depend on other countries to supply us. So now there is that relationship between a surplus and a shortage, and in order to correct this, trade needs to happen so that we can correct the imbalances. Okay, so that's the first point that I wanted us to discuss there. And then I've given you an example here as well. I said, for example, South Africa has more minerals than it can use, but less oil than it needs. Okay, so we have lots, so our minerals will be our surplus, and then but we do have a shortage as well, and therefore we need to trade with other countries because we need oil from other countries as well. So there's an example just to tie up with the first point that we've made over there. Then moving on, we look at the fact that certain goods are only produced in specific countries, for example, French champagne, and the citizens of other countries may desire access to those goods. Okay, so there are goods that are only produced in specific countries, and you may find that there are some citizens in South Africa that would like or would prefer to have access to those goods, and therefore trade will take place between us and those countries that produce specific goods. So I've made an example there with French champagne. Obviously, France will be the producer and the supplier of the champagne, hence it's called French champagne. But I think you guys are still underage, so we will use another example that you guys can access. Okay, so that's only for people that are over 18 and above. Okay, so but that's just an example to help you that, you know, for you to have access to that particular product, then it has to come from that specific country. So in order for that to happen, trade needs to take place between our country and that other country as well. And then our next point, just going to pull my screen up. There we are. So we know that droughts can severely damage the production of staple crops in a country, resulting in the need to import crops to feed the population. So we know that over the past couple of years, this has been a huge issue because countries aren't getting enough rain. And we know in South Africa that over the last couple of years, we have been struggling in terms of getting enough rain in areas like Mpumalanga, areas that really supply the rest of the country with some staple crops. So if we can't then manufacture or produce enough, then we will have to then import from other countries because we have a shortage. Therefore, we've got to look at countries that have a surplus in order for us to correct this imbalance that has occurred as a result of the drought. Okay, so those are some of the issues, just to recap on the page before we move on. So we are busy looking at some of the reasons for international trade. We have established that countries are no longer self-sufficient and therefore they need to trade with other countries. We know that there are countries, or countries may have a surplus of some goods and a shortage of other goods, and they will trade in order to correct these imbalances. And then we said South Africa has more minerals than it can use, but less oil than it needs. So it will have to then trade with other countries in order to get the product that they lack or they don't have in abundance. And then we also chatted about that the fact that certain countries are only produced, or certain goods are only produced in specific countries. For example, French champagne, France will supply or produce that, and then that citizens of other countries may desire to have access to those goods. And we spoke about drought, the fact that we haven't been getting enough rain, and therefore our staple crops are affected by this, and therefore this will result in us having to import some crops to feed the population. And then moving on to demand reasons. Okay, so starting with the size of the population and how it would actually impact on demand. So if there's an increase in population growth, it causes an increase in demand as more people's needs must be satisfied. So we know that economics is a subject that centers around the concept of scarcity, the fact that we've got limited resources and unlimited wants and needs. So economic decisions have to be made as to how to best allocate the limited resources in order to satisfy the needs and wants of the people. So if you have an increase in the population, it means that you have more people that you have to look after, people that you have to ensure that their needs are satisfied. So when there's an increase in population, that will result in an increase in demand. And as a result of this, we deal with a lot of issues. We may find ourselves not in a position to supply our citizens with the needs that they have because of population growth. Therefore, we need to enter into discussions with other countries in order to trade with them and say, hang on, we are in a shortage of these goods and services, so therefore could you supply us in order to meet the needs of our citizens. So population and demand go hand in hand, because as your population increases, then your demand will increase as well. And therefore, if you don't have enough resources in order to meet the needs of your people, then you have to enter into talks with other countries to supply you with the goods and services that you require. So it's important that we know that relationship between the size of the population and how the size of the population will actually have an impact on the demand in that particular country. So local suppliers may not be able to satisfy this demand. So I did mention that earlier on, the fact that the numbers have increased in a country, local suppliers may find themselves under pressure and not being able to supply the goods and services that are needed by the people. As a result of this, we then need to then involve outside countries or other countries in order to get goods and services into the country so that we can satisfy the needs of our people. So do bring up the local suppliers there as well and talk about the pressure that they will have as a result of an increase that has happened in the population growth, and that this increase causes an increase in demand as more people's needs must be satisfied. So do bring in the local suppliers into that discussion, because they also play an important role when it comes to supplying us with goods and services that we need. Good. So let's move on to the population's income levels and how they would actually have an effect on demand. Okay, so as a population, so if more people in the population are now getting income, or their income level has risen as a result of more economic activity happening in that particular country, so that will place a huge pressure on demand, because there are more people that are in a good financial position, or that have the financial resources to enable them to purchase the goods and services that they desire. So now the suppliers are going to feel the pressure because now there are more people that have the buying power, that have the income to interact in economic activity. So that situation has a huge impact on demand, because now everybody has the financial resources to enable them to purchase the goods and services that they need, and therefore suppliers will be under pressure in order to deliver these goods and services. So just before we continue any further with this discussion, we are going to take a short break, and I will see you right after this.